As everyone knows, we are in month two of the North Dakota legislative session, and the stakes couldn't be higher at the moment. This year, we've seen a wave of harmful proposals attacking human rights, undermining public education, limiting democracy, all diverting focus and resources from critical issues like housing, childcare, economic security for working families. Although amid these challenges, there's some really, really great work happening. Efforts to provide free school meals for our students and tackle the housing crisis here in North Dakota. And support from people like you is what is needed to ensure success. Um, and our mission here at Prairie Action North Dakota Institute is to combine communication and online organizing with offline action to advance progressive solutions for local communities and our state. We work to ensure all perspectives are heard to create more balance in North Dakota politics. So, with that being said, I think we're going to introduce our featured speaker for the day. Our featured speaker is Chandler Esslinger, the Executive Director of Fargo-Moorhead Coalition for the Homeless, also known as FM Coalition for the Homeless. Chandler will discuss North Dakota's housing crisis, including the very real challenges facing our communities and solutions being pursued to ensure safe and stable housing for all. That being said, take it away, Chandler.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sydney. And thank you all so much for being here today and the opportunity to speak with you. As was mentioned, my name is Chandler Esslinger, and I am the executive director for the Fargo-Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness. And I'm also the board chair for the North Dakota Coalition for Homeless People. So today I'll start a little bit by talking about what we're seeing here locally in the Fargo-Moorhead area related to housing and homelessness. I'll transition a little bit to talk about what our partners across the state are seeing and sharing with us, and then a little bit more on some of our specific legislative advocacy. So for those of you who don't know, the Fargo-Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness has been around since 1989. And really, the coalition was formed in response to increasing concern around homelessness in our community. A number of faith leaders and shelter providers came together to just collaborate and have a little bit more cooperation and coordination through all of the different parts of the what we call the homelessness response system. So the mission of the coalition is that we work in partnership to achieve permanent solutions to prevent and end homelessness, with the ultimate goal of making homelessness rare, brief, and one time. We are a member-based organization. We have over 70 different organizations across the Fargo-Moorhead region who are part of the coalition, ranging from our shelter providers, like the YWCA, Gladys Ray, New Life Center, Churches United, to housing partners that work to move people out of shelter and out of homelessness into housing. So partners like Presentation Partners in Housing, Lakes and Prairies Community Action, Senka, and many others. And then we also have a variety of organizations that intersect with the homelessness response system and help support people experiencing homelessness or moving out of homelessness in a variety of different ways. We have partners from Southeast, partners from our local governments who participate in the coalition and support that overall mission of preventing and ending homelessness. Kind of our regular talking point about homelessness in Fargo-Moorhead is that on any given night, there are about 1,050 individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Now, that doesn't mean that all of them are living on the street. Some of them are accessing shelter, some may be doubled up, some might be living in a place that's really not meant for human habitation, has no heat, has no water. And some of those individuals, as we've seen recently kind of growing in our community, are living unsheltered in the community as well. And so part of what that tells us at the coalition, when we start to see that rate of unsheltered homelessness increase, the number of people who have nowhere else to sleep at night but outside, is that our system is reaching a state of overwhelm. So if you can maybe visualize in your mind, this isn't my favorite analogy, but it's one that's kind of easy for folks to conceptualize. If you can imagine a bathtub, and the faucet is cranked all the way on, and the drain is plugged, and the bathtub is overflowing. what we're seeing is that more people are entering into homelessness and staying homeless longer than what our system is able to support. And so that need for services and housing in our community just far outweighs the availability of resources in our community, especially the availability of shelter beds. And so what we're really focused on at the coalition is taking a systems level approach to how we kind of manage and address that system overwhelm to both prevent homelessness when possible and also maximize the number of people who are moving out of homelessness, moving out of shelter into permanent housing. And so what other indicators are there in the community that kind of tell us that our system is overwhelmed? Well, in the Fargo-Moorhead area, where we are lucky to have shelters who serve kind of niche populations of people experiencing homelessness, each shelter in our community kind of focuses on one specific population. Churches United focuses on families and individuals experiencing homelessness. The YWCA focuses on women and families who are experiencing homelessness, but also fleeing domestic violence. The New Life Center focuses on adult males who are experiencing homelessness. And then the Gladys Ray Shelter is the only truly low barrier shelter in our community that allows people who have any type of kind of more chronic substance use or mental health condition to come in without any preconditions for sobriety or things like that. And so what we know about all of those spaces is that they have been at or over capacity for the last several years. And when our shelters are at or over capacity, we know that also means that more service providers have to turn away more people than they would like. And we also have seen the overall rate of homelessness increase. There was a short period of time in about 2023 when we had some really critical interventions come through regarding rental assistance and homeless prevention services that kind of halted some of that. It was related to a lot of COVID era funding. But we have seen that rate of homelessness continue to rise once again. And so the consequences that we see in our community of that increasing rate of homelessness and that system overwhelm that I'm talking about is that unsheltered homelessness in the community increases. When shelter beds aren't available, when housing options aren't available, that unsheltered homelessness increases. We know that shelter stays get longer. If our overall goal is to make homelessness rare, brief, and one time, a shelter stay of several months to several years to many years is a symptom of that system not really being able to move people quickly into permanent housing. We know that chronic homelessness increases. So chronic homelessness is kind of a specific designation that we use in this sector that says this person has experienced multiple episodes of homelessness. They also have a disability and they are just not able to move quickly out of that homelessness response system. We also know that the public perception of homelessness decreases. This is a topic that you've likely seen on the front page of the Fargo Forum to the Bismarck Tribune all across the state about people talking about their fears and concerns around homelessness. And that perception, although we may have feelings about what that means for us and our communities, is very real. And it's something that we're working to address here in the Fargo-Moorhead area. Again, when that system overwhelm is present, the utilization of emergency services increases. We see more people having to access the emergency room, more jail stays, more shelter and detox stays, things that are really expensive to provide our community because people don't have other options and other access to different resources. And then, of course, we know that as this crisis just grows and continues, the mental and physical well-being of people experiencing homelessness declines. The longer people are homeless, the less positive health outcomes they have. And it can become an overall determining factor for their lifelong health and well-being the longer somebody experiences homelessness. So the other things that I wanted to mention just about the Fargo-Moorhead area specifically is that we really have seen this dramatic increase in homelessness since those pandemic era supports, that huge infusion of resources that came to our communities went away. Eviction rates have started to climb once again. And we know, like I mentioned earlier, that more agencies are having to turn people away than ever before. We have seen success through those COVID era supports and some other programs that have been able to essentially halt increasing homelessness when those resources are provided at scale. And so, what we're really looking at right now is a supply and demand issue. The number of people who are seeking services, who are seeking support, just far outweighs the availability of those resources. But we do have, at least in the Fargo Moorhead area, a well designed homelessness response system that, when supported to do the work they do well, is able to prevent and end homelessness every day for families across the region. I do want to talk specifically about shelter as a solution. We know that shelter is a critical intervention in supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. And it is really common for people to think that if we just increase shelter space itself, that would be a solution to this increasing homelessness. And although that may seem like a really easy solution, what we know as experts in the homelessness response system and in this sector is that housing is the only thing that ends homelessness. So those evidence-based long-term solutions that would allow us to make systematic and sustained reductions in homelessness over time really require those enhancements in homelessness prevention and the creation of those additional pathways to permanent housing, which is really why we have focused our legislative strategy a lot on increasing the availability of housing across the state. Let me check my notes here, make sure that I'm not missing anything I wanted to say. So we are in many ways very lucky in the Fargo Moorhead area in terms of the amount of supports that we have. And it's also a really common, I think people make a lot of assumptions about how that work is funded. And in our area, in our state, many of the services that are available are actually funded through private donations and fundraising that is done by individual organizations. Our colleague Erin Prochnow at the YWCA will frequently say, you know, the level of state funding that our shelter receives doesn't even pay my light bill for the year for the shelter. And so if that's any indication of how much funding the service providers who provide these essential services in our community actually receive from our state government, it is very minimal in terms of their overall operating costs. And then if we kind of think larger, think more about what's available across the entire state, we know that the zip code in which you live likely determines what type of access and supports you'll have if you are experiencing homelessness. Many of our communities across the state, even our more urban areas, don't have shelter, don't have adequate availability of shelter in the community. And then we also run up against attitudes like here in Fargo that if we build these services, if we have these services, then we'll just have more people coming to us for who are in need. And really, if we were able to provide the services and the resources people need in their home community, people would stay in their home community to get their needs met. They wouldn't be traveling to other larger urban areas to get those needs met. So it really is about supporting the entire ecosystem of homeless services and housing across the region and across the state to ensure that we're adequately addressing homelessness. One of the things I think about a lot is we really, because we have a housing crisis in our state, ensuring that there is adequate, affordable housing throughout the entire state is actually a homelessness prevention strategy. And not only helps people move out of homelessness, but it also helps prevent homelessness. So a lot of times when we talk about homelessness as well, we'll talk a lot about an individual person's experience with homelessness and really focus on, you know, their specific story as to what pushed them into homelessness. And that's really important for us to have literacy around. It's really important for us to understand the unique circumstances that can cause someone to experience homelessness that really aren't so unique. They're things that many of us struggle with. Many of us have maybe come closer to homelessness than we'd like to admit. Maybe some of us on the call have experienced homelessness. And so things like an unexpected medical bill, an unexpected car repair, death in the family, any of those things that really destabilize families and households can lead to somebody not being able to afford their rent, not being able to afford their place to live, and fall into homelessness. And that is truly a really deeply personal experience, and it's something that we like I said, we really should be aware of and focus on. But when we focus so much on an individual person's experience of homelessness, sometimes we don't zoom out enough to understand why this system and ecosystem of supports allowed homelessness to be that outcome of that moment of instability in the first place. Um, and so, one of the ways that I like to think about homelessness and help people kind of conceptualize it is if you live in a community where there is any level of economic instability, economic precarity, or poverty, and if there's any level of housing scarcity or a mismatch of the types of housing that are available in your community, it is not a matter of if there will be homelessness in your community, but who will become homeless in your community. Those two factors, in and of themselves, create an environment where homelessness is possible. And so when we think about long-term solutions to homelessness, it includes things like building up families to be able to meet those basic needs and not have a one-time economic crisis or unexpected emergency put them into homelessness and trap them in a cycle of homelessness, emergency room stays, and jail that, again, is just really costly to our community. So across the state, what we know, what our partners share with us is that even our kind of smaller communities are facing a housing crisis. I know one of our colleagues in Jamestown speaks commonly about how he doesn't feel like there's even enough places for people to live in Jamestown. There's just literally not enough housing. Um, and so, what we've been focused on at the legislative level is how do we both support an investment and infusion of resources in those critical crisis services like shelter and programming that helps people move out of homelessness, but also how do we increase the overall stock of housing in our communities across the state? And so, we were lucky. The North Dakota Coalition for Homeless People was really instrumental in providing testimony during the interim session around a study of housing and homelessness. And the result of that study was a recommendation for a bill that ultimately became Senate Bill 2030. And the core conditions of that bill include a $10 million allocation to the North Dakota Homeless Grant. And so the North Dakota Homeless Grant is a state program that we've had for many years. Several years it was almost completely zeroed out, actually, and we've fought back now to even be able to ask for this substantial increase. A $10 million infusion to the North Dakota Homeless Grant is a quadrupling of funding for that we've seen in previous years, and it supports things like emergency shelter, supportive services to keep people housed or to help them navigate pathways into housing. It supports rapid rehousing, which helps people quickly and move back into housing if they've lost it, and a variety of other services. So this is really, it would allow communities that normally would not have a competitive application for the North Dakota Homeless Grant to be able to compete and request the resources they need in their community. Another core facet of this bill is a $200 million investment in the Housing Incentive Fund. And so the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency actually has a really incredible link on their website that explains what the Housing Incentive Fund is. But basically, what that program does is it supports gap financing for housing projects across the state. So, housing, especially when we're building affordable housing, is extremely expensive. It can actually be more expensive to build affordable housing than it is to build market rate housing because of some of the federal requirements for affordable housing. So that gap financing, especially in states like ours, is really critical in getting some of these housing projects off the ground. In communities that are considered rural, the Housing Incentive Fund can support up to 50% of the overall development cost of these housing projects. And in more urban communities, it can support up to 30% of the gap financing required to support these types of projects. Um, the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency released a report in 2024 about the housing needs across the state. And we are staring down a lack of 20,000 units in North Dakota. And just for my region specifically, in Fargo-Moorhead, we are facing about a shortage of about 15,000 units. So if you're not facing a crisis of housing scarcity in your community right now, you will be in the next several years. And so what we're trying to do is preempt some of that and create an environment, create an infusion of resources where that housing can even be developed. So those are the two really critical pieces. We're lucky that the 10 million infusion into the North Dakota Homeless Grant is something that's we've seen reflected in the governor's budget and recommendations. We feel pretty confident that that's something that we will be able to see come to fruition at the end of the legislative session. However, that $200 million investment in the Housing Incentive Fund is being quickly whittled down to $25 million is kind of what we've heard most recently. And so what we're really asking our community partners to do is to educate their legislators on how critical this investment in the Housing Incentive Fund is to meet the literal quantifiable demand for housing that exists in our state. Um, in it actually, if we think about what we would need to have in terms of gap financing to achieve those 20,000 units, we would probably be asking for quadruple that amount. But $1 billion didn't really seem like a feasible ask. We felt $200 million was a little bit more of a feasible ask. And of course, that continues to get whittled down. So there are other facets to this bill. One of the other pieces that we know is critically important is engaging homeless youth who are engaging homeless youth across the state. And one of those critical interventions comes through the homeless liaisons in schools. So this is a largely unfunded federal mandate. School districts across the country are required to have homeless liaisons, and there are only two, I believe, fully funded, full-time homeless liaisons in North Dakota. What our bill set out to do was to fund the top 10 school districts with the highest number of enrolled students experiencing homelessness in that. And unfortunately, we've heard that there's not really an appetite for that part of the bill as well, that schools just should be able to fund these positions. And I think that's, I can see Robin maybe pursing her lips a little bit at that. The notion that the school districts themselves have the funds to be able to support these positions just isn't true. If they did, they would be doing it. And they're making the best they can by tacking this on to an already full person's plate to support these students. And that intervention early in life can actually prevent that cycle of homelessness into adulthood. And so we thought that was a really critical intervention. The last piece of this bill also included a $50,000 allocation to a study on housing and homelessness. And if you remember what I said earlier, our bill actually came out of an interim study of housing and homelessness. But what we would really like to see is an expert consultant come in and really assess the entire ecosystem of support, both for homeless services and housing across the state, and give a recommendation of a roadmap of what it would take to prevent and end homelessness in our state overall. This is something that local service providers would love to be able to finance and do on their own. And we would really like to see the state make that commitment to understanding this issue across the state. And so we'll see where that goes. We really hope that we'll see that part of the conversation keep going. But as we are kind of moving in through this first part of the legislative session, some of the components of the bill that I've talked about live in actual other programmatic bills. So the homeless grant and the housing incentive fund live in the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency's budget, which is part of the Industrial Commission. So you can do advocacy in that space. We can do advocacy in the DPI space, the Department of Public Instruction budget on some of those homeless liaisons if our Senate bill were to die and to not continue. But what we're really asking for and what we're hoping you you've kind of heard from me and our understanding in our community is that housing is the solution to homelessness. We are facing a scarcity of housing across the region, especially affordable housing. And it's just really critically important that we tell our legislators that this is the solution we need. And if you want to continue to be seen as a regional economic leader, a regional place to come for opportunity and for jobs, and also support the people who are already living here, then we need to make sure that there are enough places for people to live. And that will help us prevent and end homelessness. So it's 10:30. I really just went through that 20 minutes so fast. It went way faster than I was anticipating. I'll kind of peruse the chat here and try to answer some questions as the other panelists talk. But thank you so much for your time. I'm going to throw my email in the chat too if you have any follow-up questions for me specifically. But I hope you learned just a little bit about what's happening in the Fargo-Moorhead area across the state and some of our housing and legislative needs. So thank you.
Fantastic. Chandler, thank you so very much for your extremely impactful work. Addressing housing crisis is critical, and your dedication brings real hope and real solutions to this urgent issue. Email Chandler if you have any questions. Seriously, she is such a wealth of knowledge. And we're so grateful that you were able to make it here with us this morning. Appreciate it. So this next section of our program this morning includes a few shorter presentations from three local organizational leaders discussing key legislative issues affecting North Dakota families, including tenant rights, childcare, and education. Our speakers include Kaden Felch from High Plains Fair Housing, Robin Nelson of the Boys and Girls Club, and Cody Schuler from ACLU of North Dakota. So first off, we will hear from Kaden Felch. Kaden is a fair housing specialist with High Plains Fair Housing, and their mission is to strengthen communities and to ensure equal access to fair housing in the region through training, education, enforcement, and advocacy. I will pass it over to Kaden.
Right. Hi, everyone. I know my Zoom name is Michelle, but I'm Kaden. I'm glad to be here. It's very nice to be invited. So yeah, I'm just talking about some tenant rights stuff. As far as North Dakota goes, unfortunately, there aren't very many rights for renters. Senator Braunberger kind of acknowledged this and the need for more protections for renters, introduced several bills that were unfortunately defeated. The biggest thing we're kind of focusing on now is Senate Bill 2193 and 2222. This is just kind of another example of North Dakota trying to chip away the little rights renters even already have. Fair Housing Act and also the North Dakota Housing Discrimination Act provides people with the ability to ask for reasonable accommodations under the law, and that can include like service animals, which is kind of what these bills are attacking. This takes away some of the protections, almost making North Dakota not in line with the national fair housing law. And it would just narrow the ability of people to get service animals and for people with disabilities to get a reasonable accommodation. These two bills kind of are very similar. They seem like they're kind of copy and pasty from some national organizations that kind of attack renters' rights. And they'll both definitely have a chilling effect on renters and might make our laws not equal to that of the Fair Housing Act. Yeah, so it's just some of the little protections that we even do have as renters are trying to be attacked right now in 2193 and 2222. Fortunately, so far, 2193 did get recommended with or 2222 was recommended do not pass, but 2193 is still on its way through. They agreed to make some changes to it, but we'll see if that happens. So I guess right now all we're asking is we may need people like all of you here to reach out to the committee members, the House committee members, because it's over in the House now, to make changes to that bill, make it equivalent to the Fair Housing Act, and make sure we're protecting people with disabilities that will need reasonable accommodations, and just protecting renters and working class people across North Dakota. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaden. Really appreciate that. Amy is dropping all of the links for Senate bills mentioned. There's some testimony in there. And yeah, just be sure to check that out. Keep an ear. Um, Following Kaden, here we go. We have Robin Nelson, sorry, who is the executive director of the Boys and Girls Club, whose leadership is making a lasting impact on the lives of young people in our community. Thank you and welcome, Robin.
Good morning, everybody. I'll touch on three bills that are under consideration or have died, I should say, in our state legislature. And I've always said that we can add on a whole bunch of things to help childcare, but if we don't have the workers, the children won't be served. And so Kathy Hogan, one of the best champions for childcare, in my opinion, proposed Senate Bill 2306, and that was relating to the establishment of childcare workforce recruitment and retention. And there were some stipends per enrolled youth. That, to me, would allow us to pay our workers more. Unfortunately, it was routed to the Workforce Development Committee in the Senate, and they don't have a lot of background on what happened last session with childcare legislation. There were some questions there. So that came out of the committee with a do not pass, and it failed on the floor. So that was a rough week. That one kind of crushed my soul, if you will. Another bill, House Bill 1119, was an agency bill, and that was to restructure the license types in the childcare industry and decouple the training from the license types. That sounds minor, but that would be a major undertaking for our Department of Human Services. And as I mentioned, there was some frustration in the rollout of the childcare legislation from last session amongst our legislators. And I don't think there was a lot of confidence that the agency could handle something of this scope. So it was turned into a study, which is fine. I think the intention of the bill was good, but I agree that a study is appropriate. And then one more bill, looking through my numbers here. Senate Bill 2282 relates to an employer tax credit for child care contributions, and that did pass unanimously in the Senate. Other than that, maybe 2306 will be resurrected into the agency budget, but I don't think that's likely because child care is just not getting as much attention as it did last session. Clearly, what's sucking the oxygen out of the chambers, for lack of a better term, is property tax relief and reform and education savings accounts. So we'll continue to fight for childcare. The Boys and Girls Club is the largest school-age childcare provider in the city of Fargo. We serve about 1,100 youth every day. And I know a lot of them, we have a wait list of 287 right now. So childcare remains to be a workforce issue. And we need to continue to leverage it that way.
Thank you so much, Robin. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. Next, our final panelist today actually is Cody Schuler. As advocacy manager for the ACLU of the Dakotas, Cody builds the ACLU's public education and advocacy programs through coalition building, leadership development, communication, and lobbying.
Hey, thanks. Good to be with you all today. And Sydney, just North Dakota. I don't need two Dakotas especially when all the bills that I'm working on seem to have parallels in South Dakota. I only need one. I do want to just say, as I start, just wanted to also, Kaden, something that might have, or Kaden wouldn't know, but we've also supported on that on the service animal bill. And with those amendments that were suggested, I had a chance to talk to Senator Lee before I left the Capitol on Thursday, and she is open to those. So we'll see. Watch this space for next crossover, because we might be able to, we're all going to need you all to chime in on that to get those in place. But wanted to be able to bring up today for the things that the ACLU is working on, which is usually a longer list than we have time for today. And I know Amy, when I talked to you, I said she was like, "Oh, like 3 bills." And as I started to look at it, I was like, "Actually, 6 bills because of the common themes." I won't go over all of them, are very deep because of time. But what we've really been working on or seeing is mainly working in the spaces of First Amendment. Last session, it seemed like our theme was focused on LGBTQ folks and those issues, but this session is much more related or directed on 1A work, First Amendment work, and a lot of it has to do with families and our school population. And so here's a quick overview. House Bill 1222, which would mandate the Pledge of Allegiance to be said in all classrooms across the state. 1145, which is would require the 10 Commandments to be posted originally in schools or in every classroom, later amended to be only in cafeterias. 1456 would have allowed schools to hire chaplains to work in schools as employees or volunteers. 2355 would put creation curriculum into the science curriculum standards. 1144 is a whole mess of issues around restrooms. That's my one LGBT issue today, not a 1A. And then 2307 is books around book banning. And so what I'll just highlight and say, first of all, the 10 Commandments thankfully failed 3858 the other day. School chaplains also failed 3546. And the creation curriculum was heard this week. Mandatory pledge has not had action since its hearing, and the book bill was heard on Monday. So the high level is, especially when we get around into these issues around, I feel like I've been able to like quote the same issues with the Establishment Clause and the First Amendment. Just this real push to want to force our students in our schools to force them into their patriotism, force them into looking at or having religious indoctrination. Basically, we're seeing a real theme of Christian nationalism this session. I didn't even get to all the other bills that sort of have this flavor. It is a common thread. It is a common thread in floor speeches, even on issues or in committee discussions, even on things that are not a part of the bills that I just listed for you all. So the mandatory pledge one is a real concern because students have the rights to not the right to say or not say the pledge, and it's already in our state law that individuals that schools can require this, and it's already happening in schools. This is an unnecessary bill, and like I said, it would force students, compel them, and that the exception would have to have a parental permission, which just seems to be ridiculous because that just continues to infringe on students' rights, because one day you might want to say the pledge, one day you might not want to. So I got to get permission every time, that kind of thing. And so we're hoping that dies or is modified. As I noted, some of these other things really did, we were able to die out. Big props to some of our folks who spoke so eloquently around the 10 Commandments. It's already allowed in North Dakota for them to be hidden or to be posted. And because of some Supreme Court changes, this is not the last time we're going to hear this. The argument is that there's something, and I won't go into it because we don't have time, but there's something called the lemon test. And the lemon test was sort of peeled back a little bit. And that has been the historical Supreme Court ruling that said, that we really can't, or that we can't do this on a religious infringement piece. But they peeled it back to really make an argument for historical documents. And some of the 10 Commandments has a little bit more standing. Yet at the same time, most of the arguments we get are based on morality. And so we end up with this sort of you can't have it both ways argument. So I know that my time is running thin, but would love if there's any questions and the rest of it. But we just have this real attack on free speech and the rights of students in our classrooms. And so I want you all to pay attention close to these. I'm glad that some of these are dying. I'm so glad that school chaplains are not, school chaplains are already happening. It's something they can do, but this would have allowed them to be employed, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of concerns there. ACLUND.org has a list of some of the things we're working on, and you can always reach out to me, C. Schuler at ACLU.org. And then also my last plug is, because we have this book issue that's going to be coming up, if anybody across North Dakota, if you're in Bismarck or in Fargo in particular, or between Bismarck and Fargo, and I can jump off the interstate when I'm driving to Bismarck, if you would like some I Read Banned Books bookmarks or buttons, I can drop some off in your community. And so thanks, Amy and Sydney, for the opportunity to be here today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cody. We really appreciate that. I want to thank all of our speakers this morning, not just for taking time from their Saturday morning to be with us, but for your tireless efforts that you all have put forward in making North Dakota a better place. Genuinely, we so appreciate it. Next up, we are diving into what we call a lightning round of legislative updates. Guiding us is Amy Jacobson, whose work with Prairie Action North Dakota continues to empower communities and drive impactful change across our state. Take it away, Amy.
Okay, sorry, I'm just moving a few things around. Okay, well, this has been a really incredible panel. I know there's a lot of information being thrown at everybody, and guess what? We're going to throw a little bit more at you, because with the lightning round, we want to take the opportunity to having you all here in this space to bring forward a few more bills that we know that people are interested in hearing about their status and how that they can get involved. So we know that really the North Dakota legislative session moves at a lightning fast pace. A lot of times things are happening so quickly that we don't feel like we are in the know or able to take action on the things that we really care about. So today I'm going to highlight just a few of the recent wins and a couple of the tough losses that we've had, and some areas where we still have efforts going that you can plug into and really make a change in North Dakota, along with all the great things that we've already discussed. It is really crucial for us to stay informed. And I really always encourage people to connect with the organizations that have presented on Amplify, because they're the ones who are really on the ground often and are able to get you the information and the actions that you can take as swiftly as possible. And just a quick note to also remember to subscribe to the Prairie Briefing, because that's our daily newsletter from Prairie Action that also includes a lot of these topics and more. So first, and probably most of you have heard about this, but I wanted to take a moment to reflect on a win that we had this week, and that was around reproductive health and reproductive rights in North Dakota. House Bill 1373, which was defeated, and this is really a critical victory. It could have been disastrous for reproductive health and people's lives in the state of North Dakota. It was a dangerous bill that could have banned IVF care, which is people building their families through in vitro fertilization. It opened the doors really truly to invasive miscarriage investigations, and it imposed harmful government interference into our personal lives. So that bill was defeated in the House, so we don't have to deal with it anymore right now. But I will add, unfortunately, there were some complementary proactive bills by Representative Carla Rose Hansen that would have worked to protect future access to IVF care and to protect future access to contraceptive cares. The reason that these bills were needed, I think that 1374 is actually a prime example of that. We needed to be able to make sure that people can get the care that they needed. Unfortunately, those bills were defeated, but luckily, as was the personhood bill. So we're going to continue to move forward. You may have heard, it was during, I believe during some of this floor debate, that Representative Lori Van Winkle said that perhaps we have a workforce shortage in North Dakota because we're killing our children. And she continued on by saying, perhaps women who are going through IVF clinics because judgment is on their womb and God has effectively closed their womb. This is the sort of legislative power that we are dealing with when it comes to not just reproductive rights, but most of the things that we care about, and why we need to keep attention on these people and be calling them out for their terrible language on the floor. Additionally, I'm going to move from reproductive rights to another bill, a couple of bills that were alluded to earlier, very important for public education. So right now, the North Dakota legislature is still considering 2 different voucher bills that would divert public taxpayer dollars to private schools. 4 bills have been defeated, but these 2 are continuing to move on to the next body. They will be where the big debate is happening. No matter what they call these bills, the education savings accounts, scholarships, or tax credits, what they really do is take money from public schools and divert them and funnel them to private institutions. They are vouchers, and we at Prairie Action strongly oppose them. If you remember on our last Amplify North Dakota event, we had Chad Oban from North Dakota United on. He shared that while we have always supported school choice, they have always supported school choice, they believe that we must keep these public dollars in our public schools so that teachers and students, particularly in our rural communities, receive the resources they need. Again, that North Dakota United is going to be the go-to resource on that. They have some action alerts running right now. We'll pop that in the chat and include that in our follow-up email. So that will be going past crossover, into the next part of our legislative session. So we need to be prepared. When we're also talking about schools, there is also the really big push for free school meals. That's what right now the bill that's remaining that the groups are working on is House Bill 1475. There's a coalition of organizations called togetherforschoolmeals.org. 76 local organizations supporting free meals for all students, supporting House Bill 1475. We're going to work to continue to make sure that all of our kids receive food in school so that they can be successful and learn and have good, strong futures. That bill is waiting recommendation from the committee. We're hopeful that it will come with the do pass, but that's where we need to continue the pressure. We'll post some action alerts related to that as well. Most importantly, please, when you get these action alerts, personalize them. Write your own message in them. So it's not just a form email, so that people know why you feel that we should have free school meals for all kids. There were two other things that I wanted to highlight that we haven't talked a whole lot about, but one of the things that we do focus on is freedom from violence. And there's a host of kind of bills that focus on freedom from violence. Today, I wanted to call your attention to House Bill 1411. This is a bill that would prohibit extreme risk protection orders in North Dakota. And it's a preemptive kind of ban, taking away local control. Preventing, and they're called ERPOs, removes a potential tool from law enforcement and families that could be used to prevent a tragedy of gun violence. So we know that gun violence is a serious issue for both involving suicide, domestic violence, and homicides, and firearms are the most common and most lethal means of suicide. We stand in opposition to this bill because we believe it takes away a future tool that could be used in North Dakota to prevent tragedy from gun violence. That bill is still making its way through the legislature, and we'll continue to update you on that. Also, I would refer you to Moms Demand Action. They're a gun safety organization in our state, and they're going to be the go-to resource on issues like this. Finally, I did want to kind of close out this part of our program to talk a little bit, just a very tiny bit, about what's happening nationally. We're living in really pretty deeply troubling times. It's a reality right now for many of us. It's really marked by national chaos and fear-mongering, and it's really creating uncertainty for so many people. Like so many people. And every day brings new and daunting challenges that we're scrambling to figure out and trying to bandage, including freezing or eliminating of federal dollars for very critical programs, both nationally, but here even in our own state that communities rely on. So I wanted to let everybody know that in response to these challenges, Representative Jamie Davis here in North Dakota has brought forth a resolution. So it's a statement. It's House Concurrent Resolution 3023, and it's a resolution that would affirm the State Legislative Assembly's commitment to ensuring that essential state-funded services like those for education, for law enforcement, for infrastructure, for public health, and for farming families remain fully funded and operational no matter what challenges occur in the federal allocations. So this resolution is really a call to action for our state assembly, and it reinforces our state's commitment to the people. And I really commend Representative Davis and the co-sponsors of that resolution for bringing it forward, for calling attention to the need for us to take care of those who need the care in our state, and to find ways that we come together in this national time of chaos. So I wanted to elevate that for everybody. So we've gotten to the end of this kind of part of the lightning round, as we call it. Of course, there are myriad other bills that we're paying attention to that impact so many communities in our state, and we'll continue to connect you with. But in closing, I would like to thank all of the speakers that we've had here this morning, not just for taking time from their Saturday to be with us, but really for their tireless efforts in championing the causes that they do and being a part of making a better North Dakota. So as a reminder, we're heading into the final minutes. I just wanted to remind everybody, I think I was supposed to transition to Sydney to do this, but I'll just wrap this up. Just as a reminder, Prairie Action North Dakota, we have a volunteer program called the Megaphone Project. Megaphone is a social media tool and platform in which you share messages that are value aligned with you, action alerts that are value aligned with your core values to your network. We know that people look not just to the news, and more likely less to the news, but more to people that they trust in their networks for information about local and national things that impact their lives. So you are a very powerful network to your community. Megaphone allows you the opportunity to share out the messages that both Prairie Action and all of our coalition partners are working on to really get into a wider swath of our community. I would encourage you, we're dropping the link in the chat, to volunteer with us. We have, I think over 175 North Dakotans who are currently participating. We want to continue to grow that. We know that that social media is a powerful tool, and we're going to continue to leverage it as best as we can. And then we also just wanted to make a plug. We know that you're here this Saturday. Again, the next month we'll again focus on the legislature. By the time that we have Amplify North Dakota next month, we will have gone through crossover. So we'll know what bills still remain that either need to be championed or defeated, and a lot more calls to action during that time. And finally, we're going to drop in the chat that link to subscribe to the Prairie Briefing. That is our daily roundup of news that is value aligned with the work that Prairie Action and our partners do in the state. We oftentimes include both our own action alerts and those from our partners, and do our very best to keep us connected across this big frontier state. So I'm using a daily email mechanism to do that. And then, just as a reminder, all of this information will be included in a follow-up email. You'll probably get it about midweek next week. We will, this event is recorded and posted on our YouTube, and then we'll follow up with that email that includes a lot of these action links, as long as they're still relevant at that moment in time. So if you weren't able to capture them in the chat, we will provide them to you at the end. We're at the top of the hour. So at this time, I am going to just thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Thank you to our featured speaker, Chandler Esslinger, for talking about the housing crisis in North Dakota and giving us some hope with that Senate bill that we'll be able to make some real progress. And to our panelists who are working for children and families, from tenants' rights and childcare to human rights and civil rights within our classrooms, is all very valuable work, and we really do cherish that. And to all of you for being here today, because I know that you're doing all that you can to make North Dakota a better place. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you again next month at Amplify North Dakota.